My mother-in-law booked a family reunion at the same resort as my anniversary trip on purpose, so I switched all their reservations to the bedbug-infested motel across town without telling anyone. Gloria had done this before. When my husband Theo proposed, she suddenly developed chest pains that required immediate hospitalization. During our wedding planning, she scheduled her knee surgery for our venue tour date twice, but booking the entire extended family at our anniversary resort? That was her masterpiece. I found out through my sister-in-law's Instagram story. There was Gloria, posing with a Mai Tai by the infinity pool we'd reserved for sunset photos. "Surprise, the whole family's here," the caption read. "Can't wait to see Theo's face." Theo was in meetings all day. He'd been planning this trip for months. Couples massage, private beach dinner, the honeymoon suite we couldn't afford 5 years ago. I sat at my desk, staring at the confirmation email from Paradise Cove Resort. 23 rooms. All under Gloria's name, but charged to Theo's emergency credit card she'd kept for family situations. That's when I noticed something interesting. The booking system still recognized my login from planning our stay. More importantly, it showed Gloria's reservation was still modifiable for another 2 hours. My fingers moved without hesitation. The Starlight Motel had one review. Brought my own hazmat suit. Perfect. They had exactly 23 rooms available, probably because no one else would stay there. I transferred every reservation. The beauty was the names stayed the same. The confirmation numbers stayed the same. Only the location changed. I screenshot everything, then deleted the modification emails from Gloria's linked account. At 3 p.m., Theo texted, "Can't wait for tomorrow. Just us, the beach, and absolutely no interruptions." I smiled and replied, "It's going to be unforgettable." The next morning, we flew to Paradise. Theo held my hand during takeoff, talking about how badly we needed this time alone, how his mother had been extra demanding lately, how he'd specifically told her we were going off-grid. The resort was everything we'd dreamed. Our suite overlooked turquoise water so clear you could see stingrays gliding below. Theo pulled me onto the balcony, kissing me deeply. "No phones," he said, powering his off. "No work, no family, just us." I turned mine off too, but not before setting it to automatically forward Gloria's calls to voicemail. That evening at dinner, our waiter mentioned something odd. "You're lucky you confirmed yesterday. We had a massive cancellation this morning. 20-something rooms. Very unusual." Theo laughed. "Their loss. This place is incredible. We spent 3 days in absolute bliss. Snorkeling, sailing, making love on our private deck." Theo kept saying he'd never seen me so relaxed. On our last morning, I finally turned my phone on. 47 missed calls. 113 texts. The first voicemail started with Gloria shrieking, but it was the last text that made my blood run cold. From Theo's cousin. "Check the news. Now." I opened the local news app. The headline? "Mysterious illness strikes Starlight Motel, 23 hospitalized." My hands shook as I read. "Severe allergic reactions. Respiratory distress. The CDC investigating potential toxic mold. All victims from the same group booking." Theo emerged from the shower. "Everything okay?" Before I could answer, his phone rang. The resort manager's voice carried, "Mr. Brennan, your mother is asking for you. She's at County General. She says to tell you she knows what your wife did." The flight home was the longest 4 hours of my life. Theo sat rigid in his seat, staring straight ahead. He listened to every voicemail, read every text. The silence between us felt like a living thing, growing more poisonous with each passing minute. 23 people, he finally said as we began our descent. 23 people in the hospital because of you. I wanted to explain how Gloria had sabotaged everything we'd ever tried to do together, how she'd stolen his credit card information, how she'd deliberately ruined our anniversary. But the words felt hollow against the weight of what I'd done. "I didn't know about the mold," I whispered. Theo turned to look at me for the first time since takeoff. His eyes were cold, unrecognizable. "You didn't care about the mold. You saw bedbug reviews and thought that was funny. You wanted them to suffer." He was right. I had wanted them to suffer. I'd wanted Gloria to experience one sleepless, itchy night of the misery she'd put me through for 5 years. At County General, the scene was chaos. News vans lined the parking lot. CDC officials in hazmat suits moved between ambulances. Inside, the emergency room overflowed with Theo's family members on gurneys, oxygen masks covering their faces. Gloria spotted us first. Even connected to an IV and breathing apparatus, she managed to point an accusatory finger at me. "There she is," her voice rasped through the mask. "Your wife tried to kill us all." Theo's father, Uncle Raymond, and cousin Bridget surrounded us immediately. Their faces were swollen, eyes red and streaming. Uncle Raymond's voice came out in labored wheezes. "We know what you did. The motel manager showed us the booking records, your login, your modification timestamp." My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about digital footprints. "Attempted murder," Bridget gasped between coughs. "That's what the lawyers are calling it." Theo stepped away from me. Actually stepped away as if I were contagious. "Mom, is everyone going to be okay?" he asked. Gloria's eyes never left my face as she answered. "The doctors don't know yet. 3 people are in intensive care. Your cousin Melody might have permanent lung damage." I felt the blood drain from my face. Melody was 8 years old. "She's just a child," I whispered. "Exactly," Gloria hissed. "A child you poisoned because you couldn't handle sharing a vacation." The next weeks blurred together in a nightmare of lawyers, police interviews, and medical reports. The CDC determined that the Starlight Motel had been harboring toxic black mold for months, hidden behind freshly painted walls. The renovation had actually made it worse by sealing the contamination inside. I hired the best criminal defense attorney I could afford, draining our savings account. Patricia Kendricks was a shark who specialized in white-collar crimes, but even she looked grim after reviewing my case. "The prosecution has digital evidence of your booking modifications, she explained during our first meeting. They have witnesses who'll testify about your strained relationship with the family, and they have 23 victims in the hospital. I never intended for anyone to get seriously hurt, I insisted. Intent doesn't matter if you acted with reckless disregard for human safety. You researched that motel. You saw the reviews mentioning health hazards. A jury will say you should have known. Meanwhile, Theo moved back in with his parents. He wouldn't take my calls. When I tried to visit the house we'd bought together, Gloria answered the door. He doesn't want to see you, she said simply. Ever. This is between me and my husband. No, it's between you and the 23 people you tried to poison, including his 8-year-old cousin who might never breathe normally again. The words hit like physical blows. Will Melody be okay? Gloria's face twisted into something ugly. Why do you care now? You didn't care when you clicked that transfer button. She slammed the door, but not before I heard young voices in the background asking who was at the door. Theo's nephews, probably wondering why Aunt Lauren wasn't coming to family dinner anymore. The criminal charges were filed 3 weeks later. Reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, aggravated assault. Each count carried potential jail time. The local news picked up the story. Woman accused of hospitalization scheme against in-laws. My face was plastered across every channel. The internet had already tried and convicted me. The comment sections were brutal. Psycho wife tried to murder entire family over vacation. Hope she rots in prison. This is why you don't marry crazy. I had to take leave from my job at the marketing firm when reporters started calling my boss. My friends stopped returning texts. Even my own mother called to ask if the news reports were true. Of course they're true, I told her, but not the way they're making it sound. Lauren, honey, Mom's voice was gentle but worried. What did you think would happen? You sent people to a place you knew was dangerous. I thought they'd get bedbugs. Maybe have an uncomfortable night. I didn't know about toxic mold, but you wanted to hurt them. You wanted them to suffer. The truth of it sat heavy in my chest. Yes, I did. My parents offered to let me move back home during the legal proceedings, but I couldn't face the neighbors' stares. Instead, I rented a studio apartment across town under my maiden name. The isolation was complete. No husband, no job, no friends, just me and the crushing weight of what I'd done. During the preliminary hearing, I saw Theo for the first time in 2 months. He sat in the front row with his family, his arm around his sister-in-law Vivian. When he looked at me, there was no trace of the man who'd held my hand on the airplane, who'd whispered about our future together. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Digital evidence showing my login accessing the booking system, screenshots of the Starlight Motel's warnings about health hazards, medical testimony about toxic mold exposure. When they called Melody to testify, my attorney objected on grounds of her age, but the judge allowed it. She took the stand in a wheelchair, her breathing still labored. I was really excited about the family reunion, she said in a small voice. Grandma Gloria said we'd swim every day and build sandcastles. The prosecutor was gentle with her. What happened when you got to the motel instead? It smelled really bad, like something dead, and the walls had weird black spots. I started coughing right away, but Mom said we had to stay because Grandma paid for it. How do you feel now? Melody looked directly at me. The doctors say my lungs might not work good anymore. I can't run like I used to. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of her strained breathing. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never be seen again. During a recess, Theo's sister-in-law Vivian cornered me in the bathroom. She was going to be a swimmer, Vivian said, tears streaming down her face. Melody was already being scouted by club teams. Now she can barely walk upstairs. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix her lungs. Sorry doesn't give her back her childhood. Vivian left me standing there, alone with my reflection in the harsh fluorescent lighting. I looked haggard, hollow-eyed, like someone I didn't recognize. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution painted me as a calculating woman who deliberately endangered lives out of petty jealousy. They brought in expert witnesses about toxic mold, about the long-term health effects, about the permanent damage done to several family members. My attorney tried to argue that I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd never intended serious harm. She painted Gloria as manipulative, showed evidence of her previous sabotage attempts, but it felt like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The hardest moment came when they played the 911 call from the motel. Uncle Raymond's voice, panicked and gasping. We need ambulances. Multiple people can't breathe. There's something wrong with this place. You could hear children crying in the background. Melody's cough, raw and desperate. On the final day, I was allowed to make a statement. I stood before the packed courtroom, looking at the faces of people whose lives I'd forever changed. I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what I did, I began, my voice shaking. I was angry. I felt like Gloria had deliberately ruined something important to me, and I wanted to get back at her. I wanted the family to have an uncomfortable night, to experience a fraction of the frustration I'd felt for years. I looked at Melody, still in her wheelchair. But I never ever wanted anyone to get seriously hurt, especially not the children. When I changed those reservations, I thought about bed bugs and maybe some discomfort. I didn't research the mold. I didn't think about long-term consequences. I was selfish and reckless and cruel. My voice broke. If I could take it back, if I could be the one in that hospital instead of any of you, I would. I would do it in a heartbeat. Gloria stood up in the gallery. But you can't take it back. And neither can we. The judge sentenced me to 3 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. I was also ordered to pay $2.3 million in medical costs and damages. The day I reported to Riverside Correctional Facility, it was raining. A cold, miserable October drizzle that seemed appropriate for the occasion. I carried one suitcase containing everything I was allowed to bring. No phone, no jewelry, no pictures of happier times. My cellmate was a woman named Denise, who'd been convicted of embezzling from her employer. She was quiet, spent most of her time reading romance novels and writing letters to her teenage daughter. "What are you in for?" she asked on my first night. I told her the story. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "That's heavy," she finally said. "Kid stuff always makes it worse." Prison was exactly as awful as you'd imagine. The food was terrible. The guards were either indifferent or cruel. The other inmates ranged from women who'd made mistakes like me to genuinely dangerous people I tried to avoid. But the worst part was the silence. No calls from Theo, no letters from friends. Nothing from the outside world except the occasional legal document related to civil suits. I started seeing the prison counselor, Dr. Harriet Voss, after my third panic attack. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who didn't believe in coddling. "You did something terrible," she said during our first session. "Now the question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I can't undo it." "No, you can't. But you can try to understand why you did it. You can work on becoming someone who would never do something like that again." Over the months, Dr. Voss helped me unpack 5 years of resentment toward Gloria, how I'd felt like an outsider in Theo's family, how Gloria's constant interference had slowly poisoned my marriage. "None of that justifies what you did," Dr. Voss was careful to point out, "but understanding your triggers might help you manage them differently in the future." "What future?" I asked bitterly. "My husband won't speak to me. I'll have a felony record. Who's going to hire me? Who's going to love me after this?" "That's not the point right now. The point is learning to live with what you've done and finding a way to make something meaningful from this experience." She assigned me to work in the prison library, helping other inmates prepare for their GEDs. It was there that I met Camilla, a 22-year-old who'd been caught selling drugs to support her 2 kids. "I never went past 8th grade, she confided as we worked through basic math problems. "But I want to get my diploma before I get out. Give my babies something to be proud of." Helping Camilla study gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the arrest. She was smart, motivated, just lacking in formal education. When she passed her practice tests, she cried with joy. "Miss Lauren, you changed my life," she said. "I'm going to college when I get out. Community college, but still." It was the first time in months that I felt like maybe I wasn't completely worthless. News from the outside world came in fragments. Through my attorney, I learned that Melody had undergone experimental lung therapy and was slowly improving. Uncle Raymond had developed chronic respiratory issues. 2 other family members still required ongoing treatment. Theo had filed for divorce 6 months after my sentencing. The papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a stone-faced guard. No note, no explanation, just legal documents dissolving our marriage of 5 years. I signed them without contest. What was the point of fighting? He deserved better than a wife who'd endangered his family. The civil suits were more complicated. Even with my attorney's negotiations, the settlement amounts were staggering. My portion of our house, my retirement savings, everything would go to covering medical costs. I'd leave prison financially ruined, but it still wouldn't be enough to truly make things right. 11 months into my sentence, I received an unexpected visitor. Vivian, Melody's mother, sat across from me in the visiting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't come here to forgive you," she said without preamble. "I came here to show you something." She pulled out her phone and showed me a video. Melody, now 9, was in a swimming pool. She was moving slowly, carefully, but she was swimming. "The experimental treatment worked better than expected," Vivian said. "She'll never be the athlete she was before, but she's breathing on her own again." I watched my niece-in-law glide through the water, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to see what your choices cost. Not just the damage, but what she had to fight to get back. Months of treatments, painful procedures, hours of therapy to rebuild her lung capacity." Vivian paused the video on Melody's face. She looked older than her 9 years, but she was smiling. "She asks about you sometimes. She wants to know why you did it." "What do you tell her?" "The truth. That sometimes adults make terrible choices when they're angry. That actions have consequences we can't always predict." Vivian stood to leave. "She's forgiven you, you know. Kids do that easier than adults. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." After she left, I sat in my cell and thought about Melody's question. Why did I do it? Even after months of therapy with Dr. Voss, I wasn't sure I fully understood. The simple answer was anger. 5 years of feeling like Gloria was deliberately undermining my marriage. But plenty of people deal with difficult in-laws without resorting to endangering lives. The deeper answer was scarier. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing Gloria and her family as real people with real feelings. They'd become obstacles to my happiness, problems to be solved rather than human beings who could be hurt. When I clicked that transfer button, I wasn't thinking about 8-year-old Melody or elderly Uncle Raymond with his heart condition. I was thinking about getting revenge on the woman who'd made my life difficult. It was a level of dehumanization that terrified me now. How had I become someone capable of such callous disregard? Dr. Voss called it moral disengagement, the psychological process by which we justify harmful actions by minimizing the humanity of our victims. "It's how good people do terrible things," she explained. "They convince themselves that the other person deserves it, or that the harm won't be that serious, or that they had no choice." I'd done all 3. Convinced myself that Gloria deserved whatever discomfort she got. Minimized the potential harm of a bad motel stay. Told myself I had no choice but to strike back. The truth was much simpler and more shameful. I'd had many choices. I could have confronted Gloria directly. I could have set boundaries with Theo about his mother's behavior. I could have simply enjoyed my anniversary and dealt with the family situation later. Instead, I'd chosen the path that felt most satisfying in the moment, the path of secret revenge. 18 months into my sentence, I was granted parole. The decision came with strict conditions. continued therapy, community service, regular check-ins with a parole officer, but I would be free. The day of my release, no one came to pick me up. I'd expected that, but it still stung to walk out of Riverside alone, carrying the same suitcase I'd brought in. I took a bus to the YWCA, where I'd arranged temporary housing. My old life was gone. Theo had remarried. His attorney mentioned it during one of the settlement meetings. My former friends had moved on. My parents still took my calls, but our relationship was strained. Finding work with a felony record was as difficult as expected. Fast food restaurants wouldn't hire me. Retail stores ran background checks. Even entry-level office work was off limits. Finally, I found a job at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. The pay was terrible, but they understood second chances. My supervisor, Diana, was a former addict who'd served 2 years for theft. She didn't judge my story, just focused on whether I could do the work. Everyone here has done something they regret, she told me on my first day. The question is whether you're committed to being better. The work was challenging. I helped women find housing, navigate social services, prepare for job interviews. Many had children they were trying to reconnect with. Some had burned bridges with family members who might never forgive them. Their stories reminded me that I wasn't the only person struggling with the weight of past actions. Jasmine had lost custody of her 3 kids due to her addiction. Rebecca had stolen from her elderly mother to pay for drugs. Alicia had been involved in a drunk driving accident that injured 2 people. The hardest part isn't the time you serve, Jasmine told me one day as we worked on her resume. It's learning to live with yourself after. She was right. Prison had been punishment, but freedom brought a different kind of sentence. The constant awareness of the harm I'd caused, the knowledge that Melody still had breathing difficulties, the fact that my choices had left permanent marks on people who'd never even wronged me. 2 years after my release, I ran into Theo at a grocery store. He was with his new wife, a petite woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was everything I wasn't, soft where I was sharp, calm where I was volatile. We made eye contact across the produce section. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Theo walked over, his wife following uncertainly. "Lauren," he said carefully, "how are you?" "I'm okay. Getting by." I looked at his wife. "You must be Elena. Congratulations on your marriage." She smiled politely, but stayed close to Theo's side. She knew who I was, what I'd done. "How's Melody?" I asked. "I heard about the surgery." Theo's expression softened slightly. "She's doing well. Swimming again, though not competitively. She's more interested in art now." "That's wonderful. I'm glad she's okay." An awkward silence stretched between us. So much history, so much pain, reduced to polite small talk in a grocery store. "I want you to know," I said finally, "that I think about what I did every day, about how it affected everyone, especially the kids. I know sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry. More than I can ever express." Theo nodded slowly. "I know you are. And I want you to know that we don't hate you. What you did was terrible, but we've all moved on. We had to." Elena took his hand gently. "We should go. David's expecting us for dinner." David, Theo's brother, whose twin daughters had also been affected by the mold exposure. Another relationship destroyed by my actions. "Take care of yourself, Lauren," Theo said as they walked away. I stood alone in the produce section, surrounded by the mundane normalcy of grocery shopping, and finally understood the true scope of what I'd lost. Not just my marriage or my reputation, but my place in a web of relationships that had defined my adult life. The Brennan family gatherings I'd once dreaded were continuing without me. Birthday parties, holidays, graduations, all the moments that make up a shared life. They'd closed ranks after my betrayal, protecting themselves from future harm. I was the cautionary tale now, the woman who'd let jealousy and resentment consume her until she became someone unrecognizable, someone capable of endangering children over a vacation dispute. That night, I called Dr. Voss, who'd continued seeing me as an outpatient. "I saw Theo today," I told her. "He seems happy, really happy." "How does that make you feel?" "Sad, but also relieved. He deserves happiness after what I put him through." "That's growth," Dr. Voss noted. "Being able to genuinely want good things for someone you've hurt." I keep thinking about the person I was before, whether this capacity for cruelty was always in me, just waiting for the right trigger. "We all have the capacity for good and evil," she said. "The question is which impulses we feed, which voices we listen to." For 5 years, I'd fed my resentment toward Gloria. I'd listened to the voice that said I deserved better treatment, that her behavior was unacceptable, that someone needed to put her in her place. I'd cultivated anger until it grew into something monstrous. 3 years after my release, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from Melody, now 12 years old. "Dear Lauren, my mom said I could write to you if I wanted to. I've been thinking about you a lot lately because I'm doing a school project about forgiveness. I want you to know that I forgive you for what happened at the motel. I know you didn't mean to make me sick. Mom explained that you were angry at Grandma Gloria and made a bad choice. I still have to use an inhaler sometimes, and I can't run as fast as other kids. But I'm okay. I like art class now instead of sports. My teacher says I'm really good at drawing. I hope you're doing okay too. Mom says you went to jail and that it was probably scary. I hope people are nice to you now. Love, Melody. P.S. I drew you a picture. It's a butterfly because butterflies start as caterpillars but then become something beautiful. Mom says people can change too." The drawing was simple, but lovely. A colorful butterfly with intricate wing patterns. At the bottom, in careful curse work, she'd written, "Everyone deserves a second chance." I cried for 20 minutes. This child, whose life I'd forever altered, was showing me more grace than I'd shown myself in years. I wrote her back immediately, thanking her for her forgiveness and her beautiful drawing. I told her about my work helping other women, about how her strength inspired me to keep trying to do better. Melody's letter marked a turning point. I'd been so focused on my guilt and shame that I'd lost sight of the possibility of redemption. Not in the sense of erasing what I'd done, but in the sense of building something meaningful from the wreckage. I started speaking at support groups for families affected by domestic violence and criminal behavior. Sharing my story was painful, but it helped other people understand how quickly things could spiral out of control. I was someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's friend, I would tell these groups. I had a college degree, a good job, a comfortable life, and I still made a choice that hurt innocent people because I let my anger consume me. The questions afterward were always difficult. How did you get to that point? What warning signs did you miss? How do we prevent something like this in our own families? I tried to answer honestly. The gradual buildup of resentment, the way I'd stopped seeing Gloria as a person and started seeing her as an enemy, the moment when getting revenge felt more important than being decent. The scariest part, I would say, is how normal I felt when I did it. I wasn't having a breakdown or acting irrationally. I was calm, methodical, convinced I was justified. That's what made it so dangerous. 5 years after my release, Diana promoted me to supervisor at the nonprofit. I now oversaw programs for women transitioning out of incarceration, helping them navigate the complex web of parole requirements, job searches, and family reunification. You understand what they're going through, Diana explained. You've walked this path. That makes you more effective than someone who's only studied it in textbooks. My caseload included women with stories that made mine seem simple. Mothers who'd lost children to the system, women who'd been trafficked and then criminalized for their survival strategies, people whose mistakes had cost them everything multiple times over. Working with them taught me about resilience in ways I'd never imagined. Keisha, who'd served 10 years for armed robbery, was now studying to become a paralegal. Rosa, whose addiction had led to theft charges, had been clean for 3 years and was rebuilding relationships with her teenage sons. The past doesn't disappear, Keisha told me one day, as we reviewed her college application, but it doesn't have to define what comes next. On the 6th anniversary of that terrible day at the motel, I visited Melody's school during their art fair. She was now 14, tall and graceful despite her breathing limitations. Her artwork had evolved far beyond that first butterfly drawing, complex paintings that showed real talent. She spotted me across the gymnasium and walked over with a smile. "Lauren, I'm so glad you came. Mom said you might not be able to make it." Vivian appeared beside her daughter, nodding politely at me. Our relationship would never be warm, but she'd accepted my presence in the periphery of their lives. "Your paintings are incredible," I told Melody. "You've really found your gift." "Thanks. I'm applying to art camps this summer. Some of them are for kids with disabilities. But the counselors say that just means we see the world differently." She'd grown into a thoughtful teenager who spoke about her limitations without bitterness. Her breathing was still affected, but she'd learned to manage it with grace. "I kept your letter," she said quietly. "The one you wrote me when I was 12. Sometimes I read it when I'm having a hard day. What does it say that helps? You wrote that mistakes don't have to be the end of someone's story, that we can learn from them and become better people. I think about that when kids at school are mean about my inhaler." The wisdom of this teenager, this child I'd harmed, continued to amaze me. She'd taken something awful and found meaning in it. As I left the school that day, I thought about redemption. Not the Hollywood version where grand gestures erase past wrongs, but the quiet, daily work of becoming someone worthy of the forgiveness you've been given. I would never be able to undo what I'd done to the Brennan family. Melody would always have compromised lung capacity. Uncle Raymond would always struggle with respiratory issues. The trauma of that night would always be part of their family story, but I could honor their recovery by ensuring that my mistake served a purpose. Every woman I helped find housing, every family I assisted in reunification, every person who heard my story and chose a different path, these became my small attempts at balancing the scales. 7 years after my release, I received another unexpected contact. This time it was from Gloria herself. She was now in her 70s, and her handwriting on the envelope was shakier than I remembered. Inside was a brief note. "Lauren, Melody showed me the speech you gave at her high school graduation. She said you spoke about taking responsibility and making amends. I want you to know that your work hasn't gone unnoticed. I will never forgive you for what you did to our family, but I respect that you've tried to become a better person. That matters to Melody, so it matters to me." Gloria. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that I'd spent years trying to earn back my humanity through service to others. That same year, I was asked to join a task force on prison reform, specifically focused on programs that reduce recidivism. My story became part of the research on how therapeutic intervention during incarceration could lead to genuine rehabilitation. "Your case is interesting, Dr. Patricia Haynes, the lead researcher, told me during an interview. You had no prior criminal history, no substance abuse issues, no obvious risk factors. Yet you committed a serious crime. Understanding how someone like you gets to that point, and how you've rebuilt since, could help prevent similar cases." I shared everything. The years of accumulated resentment, the way I'd gradually dehumanized Gloria in my mind, the moment when revenge felt justified, the crushing realization of what I'd actually done. "What would have changed the outcome?" Dr. Haynes asked. I thought about it carefully. Therapy earlier. Learning to address conflict directly, instead of letting resentment build. Understanding that my marriage problems weren't Gloria's fault. They were symptoms of larger issues between Theo and me. Anything else? Better impulse control. I made that decision in about 30 seconds. If I'd waited even an hour, called a friend, talked to someone, I might have made a different choice. The research was published 2 years later as part of a comprehensive study on domestic crime patterns. My case became Case Study DAR-47, a cautionary tale about how ordinary people could make extraordinary mistakes when anger and opportunity aligned. 10 years after my release, Melody graduated from college with a degree in art therapy. She'd decided to work with children who'd experienced trauma, using creativity to help them process difficult experiences. She invited me to her graduation party, a small gathering of family and close friends. I was the only person there who wasn't blood-related or a longtime family friend. "Thank you for coming," she said as we stood on the patio of her parents' home. "It means a lot that you're here. Thank you for inviting me. I know it couldn't have been easy with some family members." She nodded. "Grandma Gloria didn't want you here at first, but I told her this was my day, and I wanted the people who'd influenced my life to be present. What happened when I was 8 changed everything for me. It made me want to help other people heal." We watched her cousins playing in the backyard, children who'd been born after the motel incident, who knew me only as Aunt Melody's friend, rather than as the woman who'd endangered their family. "Do you ever wonder who you'd be if it hadn't happened?" I asked. Melody considered this. "Sometimes. I probably would have kept swimming competitively, maybe gotten a sports scholarship. But I love what I'm doing now. I'm good at helping kids express themselves when they can't find words for their feelings." She paused, watching a young cousin attempt a cartwheel. "I used to be angry about losing swimming, but my art teacher in high school told me something I'll never forget. She said that sometimes our greatest gifts come from our deepest wounds. We develop strength in the broken places." That night, driving home to my modest apartment, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. The cascade of consequences that had flowed from 30 seconds of malicious clicking. A family traumatized and permanently changed, but ultimately stronger. A marriage destroyed, but replaced by healthier relationships for everyone involved. A woman imprisoned and disgraced, but eventually finding purpose in helping others avoid similar mistakes. Most importantly, a child whose resilience had taught everyone around her about the possibility of transformation. I thought about the woman I'd been 10 years earlier. Angry, entitled, focused on perceived slights rather than real blessings. She felt like a stranger now, someone whose motivations I could understand, but whose choices I found incomprehensible. The work of becoming a different person had been harder than any prison sentence. It required daily vigilance against old patterns of thinking, constant reminders to see other people as fully human, worthy of consideration even when they frustrated me. My relationship with Theo remained cordial but distant. We exchanged holiday cards. When we encountered each other at Melody's events, we were polite, even warm. But the easy intimacy we'd once shared was gone forever, replaced by the careful courtesy of people who'd survived something together. His new wife Elena had grown comfortable with my peripheral presence in their lives. She understood that my connection to Melody was healing for everyone involved, that redemption was a community effort rather than a solitary journey. Sometimes I wondered if Theo ever thought about the woman he'd married, the one who'd seemed normal and stable until she revealed herself capable of endangering his family. Did he question his judgment about other people? Did he worry that anyone could harbor such capacity for cruelty? But those questions belonged to him. My responsibility was simpler: to continue earning the forgiveness I'd been given by living a life worthy of it. The nonprofit where I worked had expanded its programs to include family reunification services. I now supervise therapists who helped rebuild relationships damaged by criminal behavior. The irony wasn't lost on me, using my expertise in family destruction to help others repair what seemed irreparable. "You have credibility with our clients that I could never have," Dr. Amanda Rivera, our clinical director, told me during my 10-year employment review. "They know you understand what it feels like to be the person everyone wishes would disappear." It was true. The women I worked with could sense that I'd walked through the same valley of shame and self-hatred they were navigating. When they spoke about the guilt of knowing their children would always carry scars from their mistakes, I understood viscerally. The kids forgive easier than the adults, I would tell them. But forgiveness isn't the goal. The goal is becoming someone worthy of the love you've been given, even when you can't understand why you still have it. On the 15th anniversary of the motel incident, I was invited to speak at a conference on restorative justice. The audience included judges, social workers, former victims of crimes, and people who'd committed various offenses. I told the story I'd told hundreds of times by then, but it felt different in this setting. These were people who understood both sides of the equation, the harm caused by crime and the possibility of redemption afterward. During the question period, a judge asked about the moment I decided to change the reservations. "You describe it as spontaneous, but you'd been angry for years. When did the anger become action?" "When I stopped seeing them as people," I answered. I'd been building a case against Gloria in my mind for so long that she'd become a villain in my personal story rather than a complicated human being with her own fears and motivations. How do we prevent that kind of thinking? Practice seeing other people's full humanity, especially when they're frustrating us. Ask why they might be acting the way they are. Assume positive intent until proven otherwise. And most importantly, address conflicts directly instead of letting resentment simmer. An older woman in the back raised her hand. "What would you tell your younger self if you could go back?" I thought about the woman who'd sat in that corporate office, fingers hovering over a keyboard, convinced she was justified in whatever consequences followed. I'd tell her that being right doesn't make you righteous, that even when someone is treating you unfairly, you still have choices about how to respond, and that 30 seconds of satisfaction can create decades of regret. After my presentation, a young woman approached me. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. "I'm Dr. Elena Brennan," she said, extending her hand. "Theo's wife. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Melody." I was stunned. Elena had driven 2 hours to hear me speak, despite having every reason to want nothing to do with me. "Why did you come?" I asked. "Because Melody asked me to. She wanted someone from our family to witness your work, to understand what you've built from what happened." We sat in the empty conference room as maintenance workers cleaned up around us. I want you to know, Elena continued, that what you did changed all of us. Not just the obvious ways, the medical bills, the fear, the family dynamics, but deeper changes too. What kind of changes? Theo learned to set boundaries with his mother in ways he'd never done before. The crisis forced them to have conversations they'd been avoiding for years. Gloria had to confront how her behavior affected other people. Elena smiled ruefully. She still meddles, but differently now, more consciously. She asked permission instead of assuming she's welcome. And you? How did it change you? It taught me that anyone can become someone they don't recognize when they're angry enough. I watch for that in myself now. I don't let resentments build the way I used to. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Melody wanted me to give you something, Elena said, pulling an envelope from her purse. Inside was a program from Melody's art therapy certification ceremony, along with a photo of her working with a young client. On the back, she'd written, "The Butterfly Effect. How one action can create ripples that eventually become something beautiful." The photo showed Melody sitting across from a girl who couldn't have been more than 7, both of them focused intently on a painting between them. Melody's breathing equipment was visible but unobtrusive, just part of who she was now. "She wants you to know," Elena said, "that she's proud of the person you've become, that your work matters to her." Driving home that night, I thought about butterflies and ripple effects. How a single moment of cruelty had created waves that were still expanding 15 years later, but the waves had become something different than what I'd set in motion. Melody's decision to pursue art therapy, inspired partly by her own healing journey. Theo's stronger marriage because he'd learned to communicate better after almost losing everything. Gloria's increased self-awareness about her impact on others. My own transformation from someone who could endanger children to someone who spent every day trying to protect families. The women I'd helped find housing, jobs, hope. The families reunited through our programs. The people who'd heard my story and made different choices in their own moments of anger. None of it erased what I'd done, but it proved that even terrible mistakes could become seeds for something better, given enough time and care. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw Mrs. Rodriguez from upstairs struggling with groceries and a crying toddler. 5 years ago, I might have hurried past, focused on my own concerns. Instead, I stopped to help. "Thank you," she said as I carried bags up the stairs. "Some days, I don't know how I manage it all. We all need help sometimes," I replied. "That's what neighbors are for." It was a small moment, barely worth noting, but it represented the person I'd worked 15 years to become, someone who saw others' struggles as opportunities for kindness rather than inconveniences to avoid. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd kept since prison. Every day for 15 years, I'd recorded not just what happened, but how I'd responded to challenges. Had I reacted with patience or irritation when someone cut me off in traffic? Did I listen fully when a client shared their story? Or was I already formulating advice? How did I handle disagreements with colleagues? The daily practice of self-examination had become as essential as breathing, because I knew now how quickly a good person could become someone else when they stopped paying attention to their choices. My latest entry read, "Elena came to the conference today. 15 years later, she wanted to understand what I'd built from the wreckage. I think she saw what I've been trying to prove, that people can change, that redemption is possible, that even terrible mistakes can become foundations for something better. Tomorrow I start training the new supervisor. She's someone who made mistakes but learned from them. The cycle continues." I closed the journal and prepared for bed, grateful for another day of proving that I was no longer the woman who'd sat in that office 15 years ago, fingers poised over a keyboard, ready to change lives in ways I couldn't imagine. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until I was no longer capable of it. Because redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to be better than who you were before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and work very hard, you become someone worthy of a butterfly drawing from a child whose life you forever changed, but who chose to see beauty in broken things and hope in second chances.